So 6:32 p.m. Thursday, December 17th, I will call the Board of Selectmen meeting to order. So this meeting is one of our workshops and public forums regarding the 40B development in town. I expect this meeting to be a little bit shorter. We are going to be going over some of the conditions that we have proposed or will be proposing. However, we have not yet got back the data from the consultants that we have hired to provide fiscal analysis, traffic analysis, etc. We expect those reports to start coming in over the next couple of weeks. So we'll spend some time among board members talking about the conditions, taking any updates from the board members, and then we will open it up to the public for questions. And I intend to spend at most a half an hour on board questions, and then another half an hour on questions from the public. So all told about an hour for this meeting. And I don't know if the first portion of the meeting is actually going to take us half an hour. So anyway, that kind of tees it up for everybody to, so those are the expectations that I have. So I should say this meeting is being recorded and minutes are being taken by Gail Hunter. And with that, let's get into the discussion of conditions. Greg, do you want to go over the updated conditions that you sent out for us? Or the
Sure. Good evening, everybody. So basically, group them into four broad categories. One is fiscal impacts. Second is environmental impacts. The third are traffic impacts. And then a general catch-all for some miscellaneous impacts. So under fiscal impacts, we list some possibilities. One being reducing the overall size of the project. Currently, it is proposed at 157 units to meet our 10% target of affordable housing stock. We need 120 units, even though all 120 would not be technically affordable. 25% would be. By quirk of state law, you can count all of those towards your 10% if they're rental. So that might be one area where you want to consider making some changes, possibly lowering the total height. It sort of gets into design, spills over into design as you reduce the size, and obviously total size impacts other fiscal impacts in terms of number of new residents, potential number of new students, etc. So that's one area. Secondly, we have talked a little bit about the water main being extended to the project. And that would be something that perhaps we would ask the developer to pay for, to extend the water line across the overpass, 128 overpass, to the site. We have talked about asking the developer to pay for the various fees that we would incur for different engineers and consultants to help us during the process, and also perhaps pay towards various improvements that the studies and our engineers might recommend as part of the project to mitigate impacts. For example, intersection improvements. If that's something that is deemed necessary because of the project, then we would seek the developer to pay for those improvements. And then there's a fifth area of possibilities. The potential of one-time contributions towards some town capital needs. Some examples might be, funds towards a new ladder truck for the fire department, perhaps contribution towards a land conservation fund. Again, these are just examples. Perhaps contribution towards the development of a new turf field at Sweeney Park. Those are just 3 examples that have been kicked around. So then moving on to environmental impacts, we have talked about concerns over stormwater runoff and any nutrient runoff.
Could we talk about one group at a time rather than having you read us all of them and then have most of us having forgotten most of them?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So let's talk about the fiscal impact one first, obviously. So Anne, did you have some items you wanted to talk about there?
Yeah. We talked about having someone do a fiscal analysis, I asked specifically that they do an analysis at 157 and at 120. And I'm not sure that that's happening, but I think it's important. It's also important to understand.
So it is, Anne. So
okay.
The reviewers
When they consider 120, do they consider that when we ask them to reduce the number of units, they will increase the number of bedrooms in the remaining units? That's going to have a significant financial impact.
So no, we were assuming that there would be a reduction of total bedrooms as well.
I don't think they're required to reduce the bedrooms if we just, I think they're measured on units and not on bedrooms. And the more 2 and 3 bedroom units we have, the more students we're going to have, and therefore the more cost we're going to have.
So I assume that we would keep the same ratio of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units.
It doesn't say that.
But it could.
But it could.
It should. And
so,
yeah, the water main, my understanding from John, and I probably am confused, is that they will necessarily pay for the water from where our public water ends at the schools, at the end of School Street, or not the end of School Street, it's School Street and 128. It's probably against my interest to say this, but if supplying them with water requires that the town improve the School Street mains, and the School Street mains have been on the list of things that need to be improved before we even knew that this thing was happening, then we're asking the town meeting to vote for, if the developer doesn't pay for the whole from wherever the School Street main starts needing improvement to the project, then we're going to be asking the town meeting to pay for that. I don't think the town meeting is likely to pay for that. And I think that will lead us to a serious, I think that's a reason why they would want to pay for all of that. Okay, professional fees. I have some more comments, but let me open it to the rest of the world.
Other board members on fiscal impacts?
The issue that Ann just brought up of having them pay for more than just the hookup from School Street and 128 to the project, which is going to be a substantial project in and of itself. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Clearly asking them to pay for the hookup across the highway makes a lot of sense. But having them pay for something that we were going to bring before town meeting if this project had never appeared, and have the towns have it become part of our town capital improvements, that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me.
May I respond?
Yeah.
I am quite sure that John Whitten said that we could ask for that, even if it had been in our plan. If they cannot get enough water from our existing infrastructure, then why should we pay? Why shouldn't they pay? It certainly has as much to do with their project as Sweeney Park. Over.
Well, there is the issue of the rest of the 40R development and the fact that any water main going under 128 is going to also be feeding into anything else that happens in 40R. So I'm just saying, you know, we need to focus on the things that we think are really critical to this project and not try and push them completely over the brink to go to the state and say, we're not
I
paying
don't-
for any of it.
Okay, I think if we are willing to go along with them on the number of units, then they will certainly, but quite seriously, if that water main needs to be improved to support them, we're going to have a very hard time standing up in front of town meeting and saying, we need to pay for this so that the 40B project can be successful.
Eli, may I jump in a minute?
Sure.
Is by any chance is Chuck Dam or Nate, are either Chuck or Nate on this?
I don't
Now,
believe that.
I'm wondering for a couple of reasons. One is I know that we do need to improve that School Street water line anyway, regardless. And I guess my question is sort of twofold. Is how we would just take it up to 128, you know, just repair that and increase that. Is that adequate? What we were planning on doing, is that adequate to accommodate the 40B and the flow they would need if that's done? So that's one question. And my other question is, I thought that we can't, well, maybe we can ask, but a fiscal impact study, I believe, is not binding. We cannot, if we ask for items from the fiscal impact study, it's not a binding situation, is it? It's just informational for us.
The agreement, if we come to an agreement with them, the terms of that agreement will be binding.
Yes, that I understand, but I mean in terms of the information we get from the fiscal impact study. A fiscal impact study in and of itself is not an enforceable aspect of a 40B.
No.
Okay.
So
But-
fiscal impacts are not a criterion by which the ZBA can deny the project.
Right.
You can, through negotiations of a letter, you know, to get to a letter of endorsement. Through that process, you have an opportunity to talk about some fiscal impacts. So the only opportunity, the best opportunity, I should say, for negotiating fiscal impact are through this early process.
In addition to that, Greg, the water, by the same token, we cannot deny them just because the water doesn't go. We have to provide them with that, do we not? That's not a deniable avenue.
Well, if the water system was already servicing that area,
Mhm.
we could not deny. Since it requires an extension of our water system, you certainly can ask them to pay for that extension.
That
Could we
part
ask them?
required.
I'm sorry, Eli?
And I believe that part can be required. The question is the update to the 6-inch line down School Street, whether or not we could require those to be handled by the developer. And I think the answer to that is no.
I think we'd be hard pressed to get them to, we would be on shaky ground. I mean, you can always ask, but
I
Um,
think not only can
the-
you ask, you can point out that if they don't pay for it, we will have to go to the town meeting to pay for it. And I think they have a sense of the willingness to the town meeting to provide service for them.
What about their
It's,
doing a well?
so that is theoretically a possibility. They will, that's not certainly, from their perspective, that won't be their first choice because it's not as simple as drilling a well for a single family home. So it's considered a public water supply because you're serving, I think it's over 10 units is the threshold. It's something like that. So there are a lot of hoops for them to jump through in order to get a functioning well for such a large number of units.
Thank you.
Greg, is it necessary to increase the size of the water main work on School Street out to 128 to feed this project?
So in order to feed the project, you would need a larger line on School Street. The current line on School Street is undersized for the current users.
Right,
So-
so the plan has been for all of us who live on School Street, and I'm one of them, to increase the size of that feed to the houses that are along School Street now. And the differential cost in terms of what might happen if we're adding 120 units or 157 units across the highway. That's a hard thing to figure out because you increase pipe size by 1/2 an inch in diameter and you get a lot more feed.
Right, for our main trunk lines around town, we want to make all of them 10 inches.
Okay.
For the most part. And a 10-inch line was adequate to serve, I will double check this with the engineers, but my understanding is a 10-inch line, which is what we were planning to do, would also be adequate to serve additional development on the other side of 128.
So the real issue here is that we need more informed advice from the engineers in terms of what that feed might accommodate, given a jump of 150 plus units or 120 units that wasn't done prior to the engineering that was done for that line. So we need that engineering information.
Right, and we'll get that from our engineers that we have on board.
Yep, okay.
Okay.
I think discussing this further tonight is, this particular issue further tonight is, we're just wading into water that we don't have enough information on.
Eli, if I could make, I got questions and a comment.
Yep.
I'm in favor of asking for them to support the water line beyond just 128. Yeah, it's possible that the water line needs to be bigger if we're going to be supplying 160 units there than the 10 inches as Jeff had just pointed out. But I think in a broader sense here, money is fungible. And we're going to go through all of this stuff. And we'll say, well, can we get this and can we get that at that? And the developer is just going to look at this and say, I've got so much money to work with and I can do A and B and G and H and L and can swap things around, but there are certain values there. Now, there are certain things we're going to come up with that we think are probably more important to us than they are to them. And that will come out in kind of the back and forth. So my opinion is that you ask for what you can reasonably ask for here. We'll see where the list comes out and we'll see what they say. And so with regard to this, I think it's reasonable to say that you probably can justify a larger water line because we're going to have a lot more people over there. And maybe the water line needs to be a bit bigger up on School Street. Another comment I wanted to make was on the number of apartments. And certainly I'm in favor of reducing the number here. This builder built a complex of 36 units, all 3 bedrooms, or at least initially all 3 bedrooms in Newton. And the town wanted them to downsize to 32 and it became uneconomic. And the units were built at 36, but they reduced the 3-bedroom count and all of them were 3 bedrooms and they wound up only being 4. So they eliminated a lot of space there. And there were like four 3-bedrooms, and I think there might have been 6 2-bedrooms, and all the rest were 1-bedroom apartments. I do believe that the statute has a certain requirement that 10% of the housing must be 3-bedroom, and I don't think we have an attorney on the call here, do we? Eli?
Do not.
Okay, but I think there is some requirement. You can't just go and say, okay, I'm going to meet the affordable housing requirement. I'm going to make them all 1-bedrooms.
Right.
That's not necessarily meeting the spirit of the law.
Mhm.
So they're at 10% right now because they have 16 bedrooms and 157 units. I mean, 16 units that are 3 bedrooms. So a proportionate reduction is probably where we're going to be. I can't say so much about the 2 bedrooms per se, but I know that that was an issue when I was speaking with, I think it was the selectman or the councilman or ward person in Newton who was familiar with that project, which was finally built a couple of years or so ago. So we need to keep that in mind with regard to the count there. But I'm certainly in favor of reducing it to whatever we need to reduce it to take it down a floor.
If I may, one other thing I'd like to see in the fiscal area, I guess. They are not in fact providing 25% affordable units. It's 24.89 or something like that. But I think it would be reasonable to ask for that they be at least 25%.
That's the law.
Yeah, well,
They have to.
so far they haven't met it.
20 to
and-
25, I think it is.
Hmm?
Isn't it 20 to up to 25 between that?
No, I think it's a minimum of 20.
It's minimum.
Yeah, it's minimum.
Of 25, okay.
If it's up to
Um,
25, they would do 2%.
Yeah, or none, or one. The other, I think we should ask for more units, or some of the affordable units at 60% rather than 80%.
Oh, yeah, that actually was, oh, it's further down. But we-
Yeah, it's one
Okay.
of the last ones.
Fiscal impact.
Sorry.
But that should be up in the fiscal impact group. Okay. So,
Just as a comment on that, Eli, I think it's really important to, for lots of reasons, to separate those two statements of the local preference and the 60% affordable, because
Mhm.
local preference only happens in the first year.
right.
Can we write in to extend that?
Steve Brown, do you have any familiarity with 40Bs where they tried to extend the local preference beyond the first year?
I think it's it's state statute that requires it to be the first lease up only. So I don't know of any situations where it has been asked or it has been permitted to extend beyond that.
So begs a question about how valuable that is to us. that's something that we can debate and something that probably we should get a little bit more input from the public on about how important something like having us hold the line on local preference would be. I wanted to say, so since so far we're not holding to my timeline very much for going through the other sections of this tonight. Maybe what we should do is just keep the remaining part of our conversation tonight focused on what we're talking about for fiscal impacts, and set aside the discussion of environmental impacts and other impacts, traffic impacts, until a working group session where we have some more data coming back from the consultants. And then I'll go ahead and open up this up to the public forum sooner rather than later, because otherwise we'll be here for a couple of hours. So on the 60% AMI, we haven't really discussed very much how many of the units we would like to see them hold to the 60% AMI number. I suppose it depends a lot on whether or not we're talking about 120 versus 157 total units. Do any board members have any comments on the number of units that we suggested holding at 60% AMI?
One comment is that if we negotiate the reduction in units, which seems like a very strongly held position among townspeople and several members of the board, we're also reducing the amount of revenue because the project becomes less valuable.
Yep.
So whether that starts to dip down into making things much more challenging in terms of some of the other asks that we have or not, as John said, the developer is not going to keep the same amount of money in the pot if we reduce by 25% the number of units.
Yeah, well, you know, he's not going to walk away from us if we hand him a big long laundry list of things that are relatively important to us. He's not going to just walk away and say, you guys are nuts. I'm going the hostile route. He's going to come back and say, you guys are nuts. This is what I'm actually offering. And then we'll have a little fight. And
no, I'm clear on that. I'm clear on that. I've done a lot of negotiations. And I would just remind the board that when we drop the units, we drop the fiscal revenue side of this as well.
Eli, may I jump in a moment?
Yep.
I believe that the real moneymaker for the developer is in the developer fee, and that, you know, the income that's brought in by the units over long term is actually not a huge amount. So the biggest incentive for the developer is the more he can build or she can build, that percentage will be healthier. So I don't know how that would come into play in terms of our asking them to reduce the overall size. Not that we really care about that, but I mean, I think that that's a massive motivator for the developer, is that they want to make as much money, obviously, as they can, and the chunk they get comes from the actual development.
All right. Okay, so on fiscal impact, so far tonight, we're undecided about how we want to go on the 6-inch water line. We do know that we want more data about what the whether or not the planned updates to the line would serve the proposed developments at 120 and 157, and that's going to be an important factor in our decision about what we ask the developer for here. There's a request to update the, when we talk about reducing the size, to include the language that we would keep the same proportion of units.
Just
And-
to be clear, not the same number of units, but the same number, the proportionate number of bedrooms.
Sorry, yes, proportionate number of bedrooms, yes. And then we want to take the 60% AMI number up, and we split so provide local preference to 70% of the affordable units and reduce to 60% of the AMI for half of the affordable units currently what we have.
I have a
Most-
question on that, Eli.
Yeah.
I understand the 70% and the advantage that has to us and be able to serve our populace and employees, et cetera, and give them an opportunity to be there. Does the developer care? Or maybe Sue, you can comment to that. Whether 70% is set aside for local preference or not? What's in it or not in it for him or her?
I don't believe that I don't believe that it matters to
All right.
the developer.
All right. So that's not a
It's an-
negotiating piece. We can just throw that in and they're gonna say, fine.
Yeah,
All
that's
right.
fair.
I believe,
We
I
need to
agree.
know the value. We need to know what's valuable here. Okay.
I agree.
Okay. All right. Does anybody else have any other comments on right now on fiscal impact? Obviously, we're going to have more discussions after we get the fiscal impact analysis back from our consultants, which should come sooner than the other ones, I think. Is that correct, Greg? We're anticipating that one coming back sooner than the other ones.
Yes, correct.
As in how long?
We should have it early January.
Well,
And the other consultants?
A week or two later.
well, can we talk very, very briefly schedule then? So right now we have a regular board meeting, I believe, on the 4th, January 4th and January 18th. And if we're getting, you said the first week we expected the fiscal impact back?
The 18th
would
is
hope so,
Martin Luther
yes.
King. Are we meeting on Martin Luther King?
It'll either be that or the 19th.
Okay.
Greg, did you say you thought the first week or it could go to the second?
I can't guarantee it, but I think we would have it the first week.
Well, we'll know. We'll know for sure before the meeting on the 4th. So we can tentatively plan on another workshop meeting on the 14th. Is that reasonable?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, with our board members?
Works for me.
All right. That may change as we get more information going into the very end of the month. And we'll update everybody on the 4th. All right, board members have any other little items on fiscal impacts before I open this up to public forum and questions from the public? All right, so let's go ahead and move to the public forum session, anticipating spending about a half an hour taking questions from the public. And again, we're going to treat this part as a pure public forum. So board members are not going to, we're not going to debate back and forth on questions or suggestions from the public. We're going to try and answer questions from the public. Most of those will get sent to staff, I believe. Okay, so with that, I will ask people to go ahead and start raising their hands in Zoom. Go to the participants list. There's a raise your hands button there that you can press on. And I'll take Sarah Mellish first.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, good. So my question is, are you doing a fiscal analysis on every ask from all of the boards to determine how to prioritize the asks?
Greg, do you want to take that one?
I'm sorry, it sort of cut out on my end. I didn't quite hear what Sarah asked.
The ask was, is the board going to do a fiscal analysis on all of the asks from all of the boards to prioritize the requests?
So we will total up all the asks, and we will have our consultant help us make sure we're understanding the full fiscal impact of that ask in terms of dollar to the developer. Is that what you mean? And then we will prioritize from there. Is that what you're getting at, Sarah?
Right, is prioritizing the request from the various boards to present to the developer those items which might have the greatest fiscal impact to the town.
Yes. So yes, we'll work with our consultant on helping us do that ranking and determine, sort of the biggest bang for the buck, if you will, in terms of what our benefits can be.
All right, next, Axel or Sylvia Magnuson. Is that Axel?
Hi, it's me, Sylvia. You started off your meeting talking about reducing the number of units. And what's not clear to me is what is the argument for reducing the number? I would imagine it's also more revenue on taxes if we have more. So can somebody explain to me what the main argument is, or why we don't want to have the number of units proposed? Thank you.
Sure. I guess I'll take that one. There's a few different arguments there. First of all, a larger number of units means larger number of cars, means larger number of people, potentially more people in the school system, potentially a higher height to the building, which would impact the fire department more. Across the board, there's an impact to the town from a fiscal standpoint. Increasing the number of units also generates revenue, but it can be out of proportion to the impact on local services. So those are some of the reasons why we would like to reduce the total number of units.
Thank you.
Yeah, Brenda Furlong's next.
Thank you, Mr. Bowling. It has been represented that a number of consultants have been hired to evaluate the various aspects of this project. I assume that this is a non-competitive bid, which is probably appropriate in this situation. Could you disclose which firms have been hired, who recommended them, and the basis for selection of the particular firm?
Greg, that's for you.
So we have two consultants that we have hired, two firms. One is RKG. They are doing our fiscal impact peer review. They have done, they've done hundreds of fiscal reviews throughout New England. They came very highly recommended from John Witten, who is my legal special counsel for the project. John, as I think most people know, has done extensive work in 40B and has done a lot of projects and a lot of reviews and representing towns on them. So we got 2 different bids on the fiscal review, and we chose RKG to proceed. The other firm is Stantec Consulting. They are a fairly large engineering firm. They're a multidisciplined firm. They have a wide, or I should say a deep bench, wide and deep, with a lot of different disciplines represented, from environmental engineers to architects and landscape architects to traffic engineers, etc. Again, they come highly recommended from a number of different folks. Mr. Whitten again, Chuck Dam, DPW director, has had work with them, and I have worked with them in the past in other communities where I've managed. And so we've gone forward with their proposal to help us specifically on traffic and environmental impacts for the start here.
And do you envision that those are the only 2 consultants that you're going to hire?
Well, actually, there is a third one. The Conservation Commission has retained the services, and I'm blanking out on the name at the moment. I almost said it. DeRosa, I believe, is the name. Has done a lot of work with the Conservation Commission and actually knows this site quite well. Has done work on the site for a previous potential buyer, actually. So he, excuse me, he knows the site. So whether or not we get other consultants, time will tell. I would expect the ZBA may want to reach out to other firms for other specialties, depending on what their focus is and what assistance we might be able to get from the state, because they provide some technical assistance too once we are before the ZBA and the comprehensive permit gets underway.
Thank you.
All right, Sheila Hill, you're next.
Thank you, Eli. I want to just follow up or inquire into something Mr. Bob Turner said when we were discussing the water line. His statement was, well, of course, this would feed into 40R. And I don't know if he considered that a fait accompli, or if the Board of Selectmen considers 40R a fait accompli, but I would venture that the development of 40R needs the same level of scrutinization that 40B does right now, that we would need to do a fiscal analysis, an environmental analysis, a traffic analysis. And I'm a little concerned that this 40R has been attached as a positive rider to 40B without much public information being available so that we can all understand and react to that. So I don't know if as a board you want to respond to your present intention with respect to 40R, or how you see the 2 projects linked, and what are the pros and cons of linking those 2 projects.
Well, I'm not going to go too far into the 40R, but obviously it's not a fait accompli, because it requires, for example, a 2/3 majority vote at town meeting in order to adopt a 40R in the first place. So there's quite a bit of work left to be done there, both from the analysis side and from actually getting the town to adopt it.
Agreed.
And insofar as the interaction between the 40B, the current 40B, and the 40R is concerned, one of the issues about the 40R, well, one of the things about the 40R is the state wants there to be a certain amount of housing that comes out of that 40R if you're going to do it. And second, it's desired that they would, under the right circumstances, provide some funds to the town if for development of residential units within a 40R. One of the things that we've been looking into, because the timing doesn't really match up between the proposed 40B from the developer and our progress along the lines for a 40R, is whether or not the state would consider the units from the 40B to be count as part of the residential units required of a 40R. That's the only real linkage right now. We're trying to manage the process between where we would like to be on the 40R and when the 40R and 40B actually came in.
So do you have a timeline for when a more public forum would be created for 40R? For 40R, because this water main, I mean, what if we had no 40B? What if we're able to defeat that? I guess I would ask, at what point is it important to not see 40R as just the continuation of 40B, but has to be a standalone project maybe?
40R is not a continuation of the 40B. It's been a standalone project that we've been working on.
I'm aware of the work on it, but I'm not sure how the Board of Selectmen feels about it is my question. But you can, you've answered my question.
Okay. All right, next up is Pamela Kenworthy.
Hello. Thank you. I just wondered if we could touch base on the wetlands, the evaluation of the wetlands and the work the Conservation Commission is doing. My understanding is that they may not be able to do a proper evaluation and signing off on this project until well into springtime, according to their bylaws. And so I'm just wondering if you could speak about how that will affect the timing of negotiations with SLV, with their ANRAD, and then our ability to take a look at that properly.
Sue Brown, one of you or Greg want to take that?
I cannot take that opine on that one at all. I don't know if anyone on the Conservation Commission is on board that could take care of it, but that is not in my area of expertise or knowledge. I was not at the meeting.
So just a
Sorry, I
little
can't
bit-
be helpful.
Yeah, I welcome a conservation commissioner if they're on the line here to jump in, but the wetlands analysis ultimately will be before the ZBA. And so the developer won't be before the ZBA until, oh boy, late spring at the earliest. So there's still ample time for the Conservation Commission to do their work. The state law allows the developer to adhere to the state regulations and not necessarily the local regulations. We can request the developer comply with our local wetland regulations. But again, that's something that would have to be negotiated. He's not required to meet local wetland standards. And there are some differences. So that's an analysis that we will be asking our engineers to do sort of a side-by-side comparison of what the differences are between the state and our local, and talk to our own Conservation Commission. They have a good sense of that already. So that may not answer you completely, but it gives you a sense of it, I think.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, next is Mimi McDougall.
Thank you for taking my questions, and this follows on that previous question. Wondering if you will be sharing with the town any concerns that consultants report have about this project, especially the environmental concerns, before you begin any negotiations. with the developer?
Well, we'll be discussing, all of our meetings are public. They have to be on this. So when we get the reports from the developer, we'll be discussing those reports in open meetings and using them to guide some of the constraints or conditions that we have already sort of initially developed for our environmental impact section. So for example, we've talked about no net gain in stormwater runoff, no net gain in nutrient loading beyond the boundaries of the project. And the report from the consultants on environmental impact will inform those, the debate on those conditions. So yes, the information will be discussed publicly before we sit down and negotiate with the developer.
Thank you.
Sandy, and I don't know your last name.
Hi, Sandy Rogers. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So my question is there, I haven't seen on the 40B site, is there a location where we can see all the questions and, you know, sort of the parameters that you've given to all of the consultants? Will you be posting the results from the consultants on the website so the public can see? And then from there, if there are some issues that they determine, how does the board plan to proceed? Are you going to pick and choose certain things that you need further evaluation on so that you can get into those negotiations? I guess, how is that going to work? It seems like things are going pretty fast, so I'm not sure like if the level of depth that you require will be just up front if your questions were general from the beginning.
So when you talk about, first of all, when you talk about issues, I want to make sure that we're talking about the same apples and apples versus apples and oranges. What would you think of as an issue?
There could be legal issues, there could be state environmental issues, there could be just concerns in general that the town would have regarding, you know, that, you know, even if you have a bigger water main that we can't support water issues, though, you know, the total water supply or the impact to the police force, whatever it is. But that there are certain things that you will need potentially details on. I guess it seems like this is going very fast and want to understand how, you know, what your process is in one, the transparency to the town regarding what you have investigated, what has come out of those investigations, and how you are going to pursue negotiations in the best interest of the town.
I see. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So we can make available the broad criteria that we set for the consultants, and we can probably generate, make a fair amount of the report or some summary of the report available in the near term to the public, and the overall report as we proceed through this process. I don't know the exact schedule. It's going to depend on when they come in and how the negotiations develop. And as for issues that come up, so this whole thing is a negotiation, right? So we either, the town has a window of time here where we can negotiate potentially a friendly 40B, as it were. And in that we get some conditions. And that negotiation is either successful or it isn't. If it is, then we get some conditions that we get to essentially hold the developer to. And if it's not, then the developer moves ahead regardless. And we attempt to impose conditions by other means, probably with less success. if we found some significant issue out of the consultant's report, so for example, if it became really quite clear that the water demands were going to be way more than we could actually provide, and we couldn't find a way to mitigate it in the negotiations, and that would be an example maybe of one reason why a negotiation for a friendly 40B might fail, because we couldn't, in the interests of the town, well, protect the interests of the town. But time will tell when we get the reports from the consultants, and we'll try to make as much of that publicly as quickly as we can.
Just one more really quick question. You say you have a sort of a window of time with the friendly 40B. So how flexible is that? So it might be in the developer's best interest to give the town a bit more time so that they can evaluate it and go in and, you know, with a better set of negotiations in their mind, because we've done the due diligence and feel comfortable with it, versus trying to force it through quickly. Do you have an idea of that sort of end of that window?
Yeah, so that's one of the tricky parts about this entire process. So earlier you said it seemed like it was going fairly quickly, and actually I don't believe that this phase of the LIP discussion is going particularly quickly. The developer certainly wanted it to move a lot more quickly than we have moved it. Some towns have moved it more quickly, and some towns have not. The developer, if they went to a hostile 40B, they would go through the state and they'd get their letter, their certificate of eligibility, and then they go to the zoning board with a comprehensive application on a time frame that would probably be in the 12 to 18 month time frame. I think that's right. Is that right, Greg? Sue? If they went through the hostile route?
Before they got to the ZBA, or?
Yeah.
Maybe not that long.
So what the developer gets out of going through the friendly 40B, among other things, is they get to accelerate their project, and time is money. So there's this balance of how much time are they actually saving by negotiating with the town. So if we took 12 months, or if the developer got the indication that we were going to take 12 months to do our negotiations with them, they would have no incentive really to sit down and negotiate with us, and they'd walk away, and then they do the hostile. How large is that time window that we actually have to sit down and negotiate with them? We don't know. It's very, very difficult to tell. So there is some, urgency to begin the discussions so that we can get a better ascertainment of what the developer's willingness to wait while we investigate more is. But it's not a well-known number that we can just tell you it's going to be 2 months or 3 months or 1 month. Greg or Sue, do you have any input?
So just maybe it's worth reminding people that this is basically a preliminary review, and it's one of two avenues to get to the ZBA and the comprehensive permitting process, which is where the real work is in terms of detailed scrutiny and dotting all the I's and getting all the detailed information. All of that happens at the ZBA level with the comprehensive permit review process. It's a public process. Those are all open to the public, open meetings, and people can provide testimony, etc. So that's where the real heavy lifting takes place. This process we're in now is one of two ways to get to the ZBA. and it provides an opportunity to try to get some initial agreements, concessions / agreements / mitigating measures prior to starting that detailed ZBA process. So I don't want people to have the impression that this is our only bite at influencing this project. There'll be actually a much more involved process and much more opportunity to do that once it's before the ZBA.
And the
This is-
ZBA is public?
Yes,
Yes.
those are all public hearings. They're formal hearings. And people can give testimony, they can submit reports, they can engage in the process.
Okay, great. I think other people have questions, so thank you very much.
All right, Steve G is next.
Hey, I'd like to ask a question. Lorraine Iavani.
Actually, we're going in order of the people who've raised their hands. And I have,
Okay, I'm on the, so I'll get in queue. Thank you.
So Steve G is next.
Hi, this is Steve Gang. Thank you, Eli and Greg. Good evening. I'm here as the chair of the Conservation Commission of Manchester. I just wanted to relate the facts as we know them today surrounding our dealings with this project. We received an application for what's called an RDA, which is a kind of a streamlined application for permission, in this case, to dig some test pits. And those were dug in March. We approved the application. And it was extended, and those pits were dug, some additional pits were dug at the end of November under the same permit. And that seems to have gone uneventfully. These are pits dug with a small mini excavator typically. And they're to measure the presence of ledge and percolation and things like that. They still need a little bit of remediation, and there was an issue of an oil spill, which no one claims responsibility for at the time the test pits were dug. But the Concom has those under control. The second application we received is what's called an ANRAD, A-N-R-A-D, which is an abbreviated notice for resource area delineation. It simply means that the applicant would like to pin down exactly where there are wetlands, particularly vegetated wetlands, on their property. And it's an intelligent move in a complicated property to get those established. So we typically see these in complicated situations. As somebody mentioned a bit earlier, there is in the Manchester Wetlands bylaws a regulation which tells us that the Concom should not make these decisions, these ANRAD decisions, between October 1st and April 15th. And that's because most of the indicator species, plant and animal and amphibian, are hibernating or dead. So it's very hard to make decisions about things like vernal pools, for example. The commission is allowed to waive that recommendation that it's not an absolute prohibition, but we can only do so if there's a low probability of error. So what the commission has done is commission an expert peer reviewer you referred to earlier, Mike DeRosa, who's very familiar with this part of Cape Ann and particularly with this property, having assessed it before for cell signaling about 15 years ago when they considered it for a corporate headquarters. And he's done his site work and worked with the developer's consultant, and he'll be delivering a report to us early in the year, and we'll be hearing it at our January 19 meeting at 6:30 p.m., which of course is a public meeting. Everyone's welcome to attend. And we may or may not make a decision on the ANRAD. I can't predict what the other commissioners or how I will react to the findings when we hear them. But that's the issue that's teed up. Just a look ahead, once the ANRAD is is determined, which could, of course, wait until after April 15th, the applicant will at some point file what's called a notice of intent. And that probably will not be under the local bylaws as this ANRAD is. It'll probably be just under the state wetland, because that's one of the virtues for the developer of 40B. And doesn't have to comply with our local wetland bylaws and regulations. And those can also be lengthy with expert peer review, assessments of things like rare and endangered species, other things that may be necessary in a complicated site like this. So it could well be months before the Concom is able to issue a decision. And then, of course, there's a review or appeal by the Division of Environmental Protection at the state level, and the possibility of court review. So just to give you a sense of the timing, January 19 is the next hearing. April 15th is the date to which we're supposed to wait for an ANRAD unless we see a low probability of error. And then beyond that, at some point, the developer will file a notice of intent, and we will get much more serious about considering things like stormwater runoff, septic system placement and seepage, other impacts on habitat, and the official boundaries of things like riverfront vernal pools, bordering vegetated wetland, isolated vegetated wetland, land subject to flooding, etc. I hope I haven't stunned everybody with that detail, but those are the facts as I know them from the Concom. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just clarify for folks that most of the details related to stormwater runoff and septic, those are all things that would be sorted out and handled by the ZBA. The Board of Selectmen won't be getting into the nitty-gritty details and the negotiation process. Will set broad conditions only. And then the rest
Actually, Eli, if I can add to that, the local Conservation Commission has responsibility under the State Wetlands Protection Act to handle stormwater runoff within the rules of the Wetlands Protection Act. And the state DEP has responsibility for regulating and permitting the wastewater treatment facility, which I understand this project will probably require because it will be above the 10,000 gallon per day threshold for a Title V local review.
Mm.
All right, Pamela Kenworthy is back again.
Yeah, I just, my question was, I just didn't am I understanding you that really it's SLV, when they tire of negotiation, it's up to them at any point, they can turn it into a hostile 40B situation?
That's correct.
And we don't, so we're sort of monitoring their tolerance for our wishes and requests and things like that.
That's right.
And are we preparing for a hostile 40B? Are there people who are working on that and trying to figure out what strategy we might have to handle that if it comes up?
Well, so everything that we're doing is done out in the public. Right now, we're working on the negotiations for the friendly, and then we'll deal with the hostile if we need to deal with the hostile after that.
So just a quick comment. I think there's ample time to recalculate and to pursue a set of strategy. I think that there is overlap in terms of some of the information, certainly. But it's not like the developer can flick a switch and tomorrow he's before the ZBA. That will take months before he's before them. So I believe there's plenty of time to sort of switch gears.
Okay.
Robert Meal.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. First of all, I would just like to say thank you to the Board of Selectmen for all the work that they are doing in these difficult times with a very controversial and difficult project. So thank you very much. I have just one very simple question and one comment. The comment is, before we get to the ZBA, I think the town and the Board of Selectmen should have their ducks in a row so that when we go public, we know what we're going public about and where we want to go. And my question is a very simple one. If the project were approved in its current form, what happens to taxes in Manchester? Do they go up, down, or stay the same?
Greg.
Well, so we're evaluating that. So from the developer's fiscal impact study, they believe that there's a net gain to the town, that the revenues outweigh the additional cost of the project.
Yeah, but the developer is going to tell you lots of good news. What's your opinion? What's your, you got to know the answer to that.
Right, so I'm working with the fiscal impact peer review folks to evaluate the developer's analysis. So my gut tells me we'll be lucky to break even.
Well, we have to know better than gut. You got to do a serious analysis and come up with a good answer.
Yep, and that's what we're working on.
Well, good, do it.
All right, Lorena Iavani was next.
Yes, thanks, Eli. Just an observation. I don't know how pertinent this is, but in terms of the number of units, I looked at the purchase and sale agreement, which is online, public record, and it does say here that the seller that would be the Brown Trust, I guess, the Brown family, right from Manchester here, will pay the buyer, SLV, a completion fee, which is $30,000 per unit for each unit in excess of 133 units. I just wonder what the motivation is there and whether anyone has had any discussion. I've never seen anything like that, to my knowledge, where, they're offering such an exorbitant amount for units above 133. So, that gives me some thought process here. Maybe we should be asking for anything in excess of 120. Maybe we should put some kind of figure on any units, in terms of compensation. I mean, if the Brown family is going to pay these folks from SLV that kind of money, maybe we should be looking at that as well if we're going to exceed 120. So just food for thought. That's all I'm saying. I just happen to be reading it, and I just can't explain it. So, food for thought. Okay. Thank you so much. And thanks for everything you're doing. It is a hard situation to deal with. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So we've had about a half an hour or so of public comment. Are there any other questions from the public tonight? All right, so we are going to be anxiously awaiting, well, that's not the right word. Well, sure it is, anxiously awaiting the results from our consultants. And over the next few weeks, the Board of Selectmen will be going through some of our initial budgeting process. And then we'll be getting into the consultants' reports in the beginning of January. And we will have another public forum in the middle of January sometime. And we'll just keep on doing our best to educate people. And
I think there are still a number of people with hands raised.
oh, a whole bunch of people suddenly raised hands. All right, Sandy.
One question is, can you request the fiscal review to create some type of modeling so that, like, if we determine, it cost X per unit per, percentage of bedrooms, et cetera, or even per floor, because you're dealing with like fire costs and issues like that, that you can run numbers so that you're not constrained to 157 or 120. We could say, it really needs to be at 90 for us to break even, or, and make sense, so that it gives you a better sense versus constraining yourself to the parameters right now.
So yes, that is what the consulting is doing. He's building a model, and we can say X for units, and he can spit out a quick analysis. So we can play with lots of different numbers.
Thank you. That's good to hear.
Sarah Melish.
My question is, are the number of units sufficient so that based on the increase in units, we meet the 7 to 10%?
120 gives us a cushion to do that.
That include the 157 new units, or what, however many new units we have?
So if we constrain them to 120 units, if they build only 120 units, that
Right.
gets us to our 10%.
That's 134.
No, 120 total.
So but that doesn't meet the 10% when you add 157 units, does it?
So we instead of them doing 157 units, if we can go down to 120 units, we still meet the 10%.
120, and we have 114, that's 134.
I'm confused when you say 114.
Percent.
234.
But that's not 10% of the existing units plus the 130 odd added.
Eli, if I may,
Yes, please.
Sarah, the new units added, the 150 or the 130 units aren't added to the total until this won't be until the 2030 census. So it doesn't change yearly by what is actually added. That number only changes for the 10-year increment. So the 2020 census will be our number for another 10 years.
But I think we should be forward thinking and include those units in our 10-year plan, and not be short-sighted and say it meets it in 2010, but we have a problem in 2020.
Yeah, understood. I understand your point. Thanks.
We need to have the initial units to cover 2020. That's my comment.
Okay. Ashley Oaks.
Hi, quick question on a condition that would cover safety. I was looking at the Housing Appeals Committee appeals decisions on the mass.gov website, and it appeared as though while the state doesn't really buy into traffic studies or fiscal impact studies so greatly, they very strongly line up with the towns and the conditions imposed as they relate to safety. And then bringing this to the SLV project, when you think about the way they've designed this, when you look at the plans from a bird's eye view, you see the road wrap around all sides of the building, and it looks like great. From the fire department standpoint, we get to access all four sides. However, when you think about the elevation combined with the retaining walls that they need to build, the at least two sides, the fire trucks would be so low that it does not appear as though they would have adequate access. And it appears as though some of the parking near the top part of the road where it winds around, it gets quite narrow. It's not always 2 lanes with a median. So up the top, it's narrow, and you could imagine a situation where if there's an emergency, the emergency vehicles would very reasonably block off the road, in which case you have a lot of tenants who would be stuck up there. And I don't think that that's a very good position for us as a town to set up for these folks living there. And I think great comfort would be gained by an emergency access condition. Now, I don't know the law, but I do know that this appears as a condition in the housing appeals, where they are upholding, they're standing in line, they're standing with the towns and saying, yes, if this town feels that this is an important safety issue for the future residents of their town, we are going to agree that this condition is imposed on the project. And so my question is, how do we get comfort that our safety rules and our safety comfort from the fire department is satisfied by the design of this project? And could we, based on, I don't know, just thinking reasonably, say that, wow, you really need another way to get people off of this site rather than one road, which is quite narrow at the top?
Okay, thanks for the comment. Greg, do you want to talk about the fire department's assessment of this process that they're going through assessing this?
Right, so again, that is something that will be taken up under the ZBA review. And that's when those kind of details really get analyzed and hammered out. And so, yes, the fire department will be reviewing the project in detail for those kind of issues that were just raised, which are good points. And we can also bring in some additional expertise if we feel like we need that to help the ZBA reach a finding that the project is indeed safe from
Okay,
a
so
fire standpoint.
that makes sense. But I thought that part of this process, this early part, was we needed to flag to the developer anything that we felt like was a real deal breaker or something very critical that would really alter the project. And this seems to me, life safety, to be something that would be crucial prior to the ZBA portion. And maybe that's just, the way the process works, but it's just a thought.
Yeah, no, we'll follow up with the fire chief. I know that he's been reviewing it, and I'll double check to make sure if there are some major issues there that he sees.
Okay. All right. That's less the people we have with hands raised tonight. So I think I'm going to thank everybody for coming and listening to us tonight. We will try to give people like I said, we're planning on January 14th for our next working group session and public forum. I'll try to take public input on that. I'll warn people that if we do have a significant amount of information back from the consultants before that meeting, there's going to be a significant upfront part of that meeting that's going to be workshop with the Board of Selectmen, and public forum related activity would be later in the meeting. All right, so with that, I think I will take a motion to adjourn.
So
So
moved.
moved. Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote. Mr. Bob Turner,
Yes.
Ms. Harrison,
Yes.
Ms. Jakes,
Yes.
Mr. Round,
Yes.
Mr. Bowling votes yes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Eli.